History doesn't really lie, it just points. Look there. So you don't look here. You remember the monument. You forget what's holding it up. You memorize the date. You don't sit with the stone long enough to get uncomfortable. And if something feels wrong, there's a label for that. Done. But stone doesn't care. It doesn't know dates. It only knows weight and time. So when something feels older than the year printed next to it, that's not a theory. That's the moment you stop agreeing and start noticing. I was looking at the Statue of Liberty, not researching it, not thinking about history, just looking. The way you look at something you've seen too many times to really see any more. Everyone looks up, the face, the torch, the meaning. That part's easy. It's been explained to us since school. What I didn't look at, for a long time, was what she's standing on, the base. And I don't remember the exact moment I noticed it. That's kind of the problem. It wasn't dramatic, it was just uncomfortable. The base is big, not elegant big, heavy big, squared, angled. It doesn't feel like it's there to be admired. It feels like it's there to hold something. And that thought annoyed me more than it should have. Because pedestals aren't supposed to feel defensive. Forts are, and this thing, whatever polite name we give it, behaves like one. A star fort. I didn't like that conclusion, so I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing. One structure doesn't mean anything. You can always explain one thing away. That's what we do. The problem is, I saw it again. Not in the same place, somewhere else, the same angles, the same geometry. Not always labeled, sometimes not labeled at all, just sitting there, underneath something newer. That's when it stopped feeling like design and started feeling like repetition. And repetition is harder to ignore. Because patterns don't ask for attention, they survive without it. What really stuck with me wasn't how famous these shapes were, it was how quiet they were. They're almost never the attraction. They sit underneath something else, behind something else. Like they're supposed to be background. I kept noticing the same thing. The building on top would look cleaner, newer. The base underneath would look heavier, older, like two different stories forced to share the same space. At that point, I stopped Googling and just started looking. That's how I ended up in Puerto Rico, San Juan. There's a fort there, San Felipe. The official date is 1521. I've read that sentence a lot, so many times it stopped sounding real. Then I looked at the wall, 42 feet, and I remember thinking, that's not an interpretation, that's just a measurement. This isn't a temporary outpost, this isn't a handful of people stacking rocks and hoping for the best. This is infrastructure, and it's not just one fort, San Juan is wrapped in it. Layered defenses, stone everywhere. That kind of scale doesn't come from improvisation, it comes from systems. And then there were the details. Block work that looked deliberate, edges that looked cast, not chipped. Things people casually call decoration, or antennas. I'm not saying what they are. I'm saying they don't feel like 1521. Some parts were later turned into a cemetery. That didn't shock me, that felt familiar. We rename things, we reuse things. It makes the past quieter. And standing there, looking at that stone, I caught myself doing something strange. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was trying to convince myself that it was normal. And that's when I realized something. History doesn't usually lie. It doesn't need to. It just points your attention somewhere else and waits for you to stop looking down. Because once you really look at the foundation, not the story, not the plaque. The story stops feeling finished. And that's a hard feeling to walk away from. At some point, I realized the pattern wasn't moving outward. It was already inland. Not ports, not capitals. Utah is where I stopped pretending this was just about architecture. Because here, the numbers don't let you drift. The settlers arrive in 1847. That date is clean, everyone agrees on it. And the number that keeps getting repeated is 147 men. I remember reading that and feeling my mind do something automatic. It tried to round it up. It tried to imagine more people, more time, anything softer. But the number doesn't move. Then you slide forward. Salt Lake City, 1913. And it's not a camp anymore. It's not even a town. It's a city. Stone buildings, wide streets, institutions that assume permanence. That jump happens in 66 years. I kept wanting to say that out loud just to hear how it sounded. 66 years. That's not history, that's a lifespan. And here's where the story starts to feel tight around the edges. Because speed can explain a lot of things. It can explain messy construction, temporary solutions. It doesn't explain an entire system appearing fully formed. At some point, I realized I wasn't asking how impressive is this. I was asking what had to already exist for this to work at all. And then there's the part that doesn't fit anywhere comfortably. You move 15 miles west of the city, out onto the lake. There's a structure built on a pier, not on land, not where it would be convenient. Out over salt water. That detail bothered me more than the city itself, because it doesn't feel like ambition. It feels like inheritance, like something was already there, and the question was never why build this, but what do we do with it now? And standing there, at least mentally, I realized Utah wasn't an example. It was a test. If the timeline holds here, it holds anywhere. And if it doesn't, then it was never as solid as it sounded. And then there's the rest of Salt Lake, the part people rush past. The temple is supposed to be under construction in the old photos. But it doesn't look unfinished. It looks settled. Finished stone, sharp edges. Around it, there used to be old walls. Crumbling ones. They're gone now. That happens a lot. The Salt Palace is stranger. Today it's concerts, lights, noise, but the roof doesn't match the story. Those structures up there, people call them antennas. Maybe they are. But I've seen that shape before, in places that aren't supposed to rhyme. And then there's the grid. Not just streets, a pattern, clean, confident. Grids aren't how you experiment, they're how you commit. Which makes you wonder, quietly, what kind of city this was meant to be before it was explained to us. There's a courthouse in Salt Lake City. I've walked past it more times than I can remember, and for years I didn't really see it. Then one day I noticed the columns, not the style, the method, their cast, uniform. Big enough that you don't hand-wave them. And that's when something clicked, in the worst way. Because I've seen those columns before, same proportions, same feel, in St. Petersburg. Not inspired by, not similar, the same. That's when the story stopped feeling local. Frontiers don't share manufacturing habits with old imperial cities. They don't casually line up like that. I tried to talk myself out of it. Different place, different story, but the columns didn't change. They just stood there, doing what stone always does, waiting for someone to notice that it remembers more than the plaque ever will. I'm not trying to rewrite history. Honestly, I don't think that's possible. History doesn't move that easily. What I'm doing is smaller than that, and maybe harder. I'm paying attention to the parts that don't help the story move forward, the foundations, the leftovers, the things that don't explain themselves very well. I used to think that meant something was missing. Now I'm not so sure. Sometimes it feels like nothing is missing at all. We just stopped looking once the explanation felt comfortable enough. Stone doesn't care about comfort. It doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It just stays. And once you notice that, really notice it, you don't suddenly have answers. You just lose the habit of nodding along too quickly. And maybe that's the point, not to replace the story, just to slow it down long enough to hear what it keeps talking over.